Analysis of system requirements. OGRE3D's resources are flexible and can adapt to any type of game, whether it's an FPS, RPG, RTS. Therefore, in terms of resources, we can say that OGRE3D is genre agnostic. Regarding cross-platform compatibility, OGRE3D's resources are indeed compatible across multiple platforms, as model, textures, and other assets are supported on Windows, Linux, macOS, and Android. The only resources that may require adaptation are shaders and materials, which need to be adjusted to the render system of each platform. It's important to note that OGRE3D supports multiple rendering engines, which affects how resources are managed. The compatible render systems are Direct3D, OpenGL, Vulkan, and Metal. To understand how OGRE3D manages and implements its resources, it is essential to examine how they are loaded, organized, and used based on its documentation. There are basically 3 questions related to this. The first one is how are resources loaded in OGRE3D? And we can say that OGRE3D uses a system that allows loading models, textures, metals through configuration files, and a resource group system, which enables loading resources in groups to improve performance. Here you can see a piece of code of this. Then, how are the resources organized in OGRE3D? You can see that OGRE3D uses different types of resources, each managed through its own system. For example, 3 models are created in external programs like Blender and are exported as .mesh files. Another example is materials and textures that are exported as .material, .jpg, etc. And finally, another example is the shaders that are managed through HLMS. And the last question is, how are resources used in OGRE3D? Well, OGRE3D uses resources through various methods like OGRE Texture Manager that manages textures and image loading, OGRE Mesh Manager manages .mesh models, Resource Group Manager, it's a manager resource loading in groups, and other specialized classes depending on the type of resource. Examples of use. There are several games that use OGRE3D's resource management system. For instance, Torchlight uses OGRE3D's model and texture management system to achieve its colorful visual style. Another one is Ankh that uses OGRE3D scripts to manage materials and batch resource loading. Additionally, it is useful to analyze code examples showing how the graphics engine loads and uses different types of resources. For example, include loading a 3D model into a scene from a .mesh file and loading a texture to be used in materials. Here you can see both examples with real code lines.
Comparison with Unity Engine. It is important to note that OGRE3D is a graphics engine focused on rendering and resource management, where Unity is a full game engine with integrated resource management and a set of tools designed to simplify assets usage in games. Ignoring the fundamental differences, such as Unity built-in asset system and features that OGRE3D lacks, we can compare their strengths. Strengths of Unity: simple and visual resource management, powerful assets loading system, easy integration with external platforms and services. Now the strengths of OGRE3D: full control over resources and high optimization for visual projects. Conclusions: the strengths, the weaknesses, and possible improvements. The strengths: there's a high flexibility and control, allowing the developers to manage resources in a customized way. resource grouping systems that enables organizing assets into different categories and managing them separately. Also, powerful textures and material management system. The weaknesses. There's a limited documentation on resource management, making the learning and implementation difficult for new users. Also, the lack of an all-in-one resource system, requiring developers to integrate external libraries to complete their infrastructure. What are the possible improvements? Improve the documentation on resource management to make it more accessible for new users, and change resource integration into a unified system to simplify implementation. And finally, implement an automatic resource loading and organization system to improve performance.